Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. What does good preparation for the transition to adulthood look like? Stick around and find out by the end of this episode, which is part 2 of my conversation with Cammie McGovern, originally released on September 16, 2021. Cammie McGovern is the mother of a 25-year-old autistic man and the author of several books about disabilities, including Hard Landings: Looking into the Future of a Child with Autism, her latest title at the time of this recording. Among other things, we discuss essential skills parents should prioritize when preparing their kids for adulthood, proactive steps for parents whose children are approaching this stage in life, the importance of sexual education, and tips for parents of newly diagnosed autistic children. In this episode, discover what's possible when success is measured in belonging. And now I present you Cammie McGovern. So what's the best route for parents as they are approaching this disability cliff?
I was most impressed when I was traveling around the country by places that were started by parents while their kids were still young. They just got together with other parents and with the instinct or intuition that eventually what my kid will need is some kind of community. And so whatever that would look like. And for some, it's a work situation. So there's parents who are starting small businesses, coffee shops, a garden, a food delivery, a snack cart, all kinds of different parent or family started jobs. And those are wonderful because instinctively they end up hiring and engaging lots of other people with disabilities, a wide variety of disabilities, and it works really well. There's tons of those examples around. One of the most successful is in Florida, Rising Tide Car Wash, that it was started by a father and his son who was kind of a businessman for the brother who was autistic. And he's ended up employing, I think, close to 100 people with autism at separate sites. And oh boy, are they ever successful at that. It turns out they were trying to figure out what are autistic people great at. It's detail-oriented, it's following steps, and they've got a 35-step process to washing the cars. So they actually started when Andrew was approaching the disability cliff, so they didn't start too late. I just am admiring the ones that started much earlier. I think along the same lines, the parents who were thinking about residential early on really got a head start, and they're the ones with the most exciting options for, and those are happening all over the country now. And they seem to be happening frequently, though I don't know if this correlates, in the states that have the longest wait list and the least money available, had the most parents that were scrambling to see the state isn't going to take care of this issue. We need to. And then in Florida, for instance, they were offering some kind of assistance in low-income tax benefits, low-income tax something. And groups of parents were just starting to and get donated land that was not being used elsewhere. In Florida has lots of this. They also have the model of retirement communities. And that is where more groups are starting to think, is that how can we build a little complex that would look somewhat like a retirement village, have a swimming pool, a community center, but wouldn't be overall care. It would be staffed. It would be lightly staffed because the big issue for the modeling is how much staffing. But parents would be part of it and individuals would have their own staff coming in. But we would be a community with activities every day, with connections with each other, with the ability to teach each other how to live independently. And visiting those places was probably the most eye-opening to me because I would arrive thinking, Ethan could never do this. This is so interesting. This is all for higher functioning young adults. And then I would meet and talk to someone who reminded me so much of Ethan. And, you know, the director would explain this person just learned he had a really good roommate, and the roommate taught him how to go to the grocery store, how to cook dinner. Those are things that in Massachusetts, where the housing opportunities are really limited, we just haven't seen how they can teach each other independent living skills, how they can support each other, how Massachusetts tends to put a very high priority on high staffing ratio, which means very, very limited housing opportunities because everybody needs to have a one-on-one staff. It's not a model that's going to be able to move forward in the next 20 years realistically because it requires so much funding. So the ones that are looking at examples that require less staffing seem to be the ones that and still be safe, because that's the whole question for parents is this going to be safe? Is my kid going to be okay? What's going to happen after I'm gone? Who's going to look after them? So those are crucial questions, but I feel like I was very heartened to see our kids are going to be capable of more if we allow them to learn more early on and allow them to learn from each other, which was a huge part of Ethan's success at Prospect Meadow Farm, is that he immediately attached to not staff necessarily, but other farm hands who were slightly better at him than certain things, and they would teach each other. I feel like that's something that doesn't get explored enough.
Yeah. Kind of like peer mentoring in a way.
Peer mentoring, yeah, which happens naturally if there's not staff, if it's not overstaffed from the get-go. Yeah. The idea that you have to do it all yourself is hugely daunting. And I am very sympathetic to ones who are saying, I can't possibly do that. I don't have enough people around here. So then more realistically, I would say, and quickly add, you're looking for the places where your child feels most successful and happiest, and you're trying to figure out how to get them in groups and communities where they feel good and successful, and pushing for the accommodations or whatever is necessary to get them there. And that may be a little bit of a fight, but it's also a fight that more parents are winning these days, and be heartened by that because things are changing all the time. And that's a better, more realistic answer.
Yeah. Okay. What comes up for you when you think about Ethan's future and where he's going to be when you're not around anymore?
Good question. In fact, it's the question most parents don't want to think about. And I do feel like it's an essential one and this is one of the turning points that parents need when they're leaving school, entering their 20s. There is research that says the folks who live independently from their parents in this, starting within their 20s, do better, have better, more productive, and are happier in the long run, whatever those measures are. From my travels, one of the big takeaways is I see how that's probably true, that I wasn't doing any scientific questionnaires that were asking about happiness and productivity or satisfaction, life satisfaction. But it's a good message to parents that say to let parents know you aren't the only ones that can properly care for your child. That said, Ethan is living at home with us, and we have no immediate movement for that to change because we live in Massachusetts where the options are pretty limited and it's a pretty hard fight. It mostly depends upon the caregiver's health and that kind of thing in order to get residential funding of any kind. And I will continue to hope that changes and work towards that changing, that more intentional communities are allowed, a wider variety of communities are allowed. When I look at the options, which I sort of detailed quite a bit in my book, it's going to look so differently for every person. And my hope ultimately is that Ethan will increase his independence over time and will want to, he would say, I want to work at Prospect Meadow Farm for the rest of my life and live in my bedroom at home. So he's not pining for more independence, and that has left us not working towards it. I guess that's why I started with, it's important for me, even if your kid is saying that they just want to live at home with us and have us, and you're kind of sure, oh, we're the best company and the best caregivers possible. It's still important to be entertaining and thinking about ultimately this won't be forever. And ultimately he'll do better the sooner he's able. The tragedies of people that are age 50 and parents with sudden health issues or deaths of their parents getting moved across the state to the first bed available are really chilling. And that's what's happening right now too often in many states. So the more you can prep for this, and I'm not saying I've done a super duper job, the better, because and the more options, or the more we talk about, and the book goes into a lot of different options. People are building tiny houses in their backyards. That's probably the newest trend, so that they are independent, and ultimately when you die the house can be their source of income and could get rented out. They could move in there with some establishing something that is them being able to care for themselves separate from you. Adult foster care or living with another family, so it's not so emotionally tied to the parents, is another option. And then that can move into, there's different options. Roommates who get compensated for being not caregivers, but active and responsible roommates, is another interesting option. It'll be different for every individual.
Mm-hmm. And what skills should parents prioritize teaching their kids as they prepare them for adulthood?
One of the points I make in the book, which is one that I wish I had heard, and I don't know if other parents will feel the same way. Ethan has autism and intellectual disability. And every parent with that combo will know that you don't let that stop you from making a lot of academic goals, because it seems so crucial that they learn to read, do basic math, understand comprehension, all of those academic goals. But in retrospect, I now understand that some of the material that I was desperate for Ethan to keep up with academically has been less important for his overall life and for his adult life. So me frantically putting him in accommodated science class that was learning parts of the cell was maybe not the best. I was doing that back in middle school, but every parent will know you don't want to give up on academics. You don't want to give up on academics. But the problem is, I think in the long run, the skills that seem to matter most is their adaptability to some kind of work, whatever that might be, or something where they are putting in effort and being successful. And then those work skills are things like what are called the soft work skills, are things like being able to follow directions, take a suggestion from a boss and utilize it and improve your job. Ethan was terrible at a lot of these things, and he would get criticized once and he would fly into a rage because he likes really, really positive things where everybody loves him. He's very appealing and sweet. And then until you kind of pushed the wrong button, and a lot of these kids are this way. So he loves laughing and carrying on. And then somebody says, no, you need to repack the grocery bag a different way. And he couldn't deal with that. I would say working on frustration tolerance and ability navigating the world. One of Ethan's gifts is that he can walk into town by himself. And that was the one thing they concentrated, because he always wanted that. Something like independent maneuvering bus systems, public bus systems, doesn't occur to parents until right before their child reaches adulthood. And that ends up being the most freeing thing they can possibly have at their access. If they can navigate getting places they want to go, they are a whole different, their life looks entirely different. So buses, public transportation, and safety in public, and parents trusting or at least entertaining the idea that your adult child might be able to do more than you think they can, and let that happen. That's one of the only smart things we did in transition, was say, let's watch you follow Ethan around town and see what he's doing, and getting the word back that he is safe. He does what he says he's going to do has changed, that every weekend he walks into town and talks to his folks, his whoever his friends are, gets his soda and his Chinese food and comes home. And that's a huge pleasure that he has, that he didn't develop the skill to do that until he was probably 19.
Mm-hmm. How did you teach it to him?
We got the school's help, that school was close enough to town,
Oh,
and they
right.
had an aide trailing after him. But it's also possible, I just saw, when I was traveling around, I saw a lot more young adults who seemed to be more or less at Ethan's level, who had just been granted the power to do a lot more on their own. So in Florida, because their parents had created this community where they were all going to take the bus and do their grocery shopping on their own and manage that, they learned an ATM. Money is a huge stumbling block for so many of these folks, and ATM cards are so easy that empowering them with the ability to buy something with that simple action is a gift. And with that simple power, the skill to, you don't have to know what money, you don't have to make change for a 20 or a quarter or anything to be able to just go and buy your food that you want. Those who can do that seem to have a wider life, more of a life, I would say.
Hey, Rachel here. Are you enjoying this episode? Want to hear more valuable content from others you can relate with? Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can stay up to date on future episodes. And now back to the conversation. How about on the topic of sexual education? Have you had conversations with Ethan about this?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, I have a piece coming out in the New York Times. It was supposed to be today, but it might be tomorrow, about the need for more federal mandating sexual education, because in starters, to address the terrifying issue that with increased independence comes increased danger, and that danger is real, and the incidence of sexual assault, these folks in the autism and IDD community are estimated to be 7 times more likely to be the victim of assault than their non-disabled peers. So that's the ultimate fear for parents. The number one protection is better education, because the number one danger is actually people they know. If they have better education, they have the language to report, they have the understanding of what's appropriate and not appropriate. And shockingly, in our country, it is not mandated to have any sex education at all for people with disabilities, except in 3 states. None, 0. So what happens if it's not federally mandated, and some states are taking it on themselves? Those 3 are saying, yes, all SPED classes need to cover basics of self-protective good touch, bad touch, which is only the beginning. If it's not federally mandated, it is very often left up to the individual school systems and individual superintendents, who will not address this. It's too prickly an issue. It's too difficult unless parents demand it. And I didn't understand this until Ethan was 17 and other parents were demanding it. And I thought, oh my gosh, I live in Amherst in Massachusetts, where everybody is pretty liberal and pretty educated. I thought it was happening in school, and it was not, because nobody had demanded it. Ethan knew nothing. So the first thing parents of younger kids should do on this topic is find out, how much are they part of sex ed, starting with puberty? So this isn't a big mystery. And that is so devastating to some of them, the mysterious changes of puberty that parents aren't going to address because they assume that schools are, and too many schools are keeping SPED kids out of those puberty classes. So make sure your kid is in the puberty class. And then start with asking for rudimentary sex ed and what it would look like. And after that comes the next step, which is figuring out how these individuals can manage their own sexuality and their own potential for healthy relationships. And that's what a lot of parents don't want to consider or think about, and oppose sex education, thinking if he hears about it, he's going to want it. And the reality is they've already heard about it. It's too pervasive on TV and movies for them not to already know that sex exists and everybody's talking about it and everybody seems to like it. And there's wonderful programs and curriculums out now that teach healthy relationships and consensual sexuality and bringing this pleasure into their life. And it will be different for different, if they are ready and want this, it is far better to do a careful and thoughtful program that includes just development of good relationships, not to limit the knowledge that they have or try and cut it off. That's what leads to really inappropriate and very ostracizing behaviors. And we got to start from the beginning of how to do this right and how to do this well and how to get a girlfriend. And I wish I had known a lot of this earlier. And for Ethan, we did a terrible job. I mean, there's ways that it might seem like we were very proactive parents, but we did a terrible job with this. And just depending upon the schools to do it. So I assume a lot of parents, you just feel like, oh, that's the most awkward conversation. If he's not asking, I'm not going to bring it up. Why bring it up? Let's keep going over money, making change for a quarter. And it's better to go over the nuts and bolts, and especially as their bodies are changing, they're more aware of that. I wish I had done more of that when Ethan was younger.
Well, how old is he now, you said?
25.
Do you think it is still a possibility to have that conversation with him?
Oh, we do now.
Okay.
And he has taken classes. He does not love talking about it. So many of them won't. He will like put his fingers in his ears and say, no, this is embarrassing. But he also liked having girlfriends. He doesn't right now, but he has in the past had girlfriends that he holds his hands with. And I sort of talk about this in the book, but he never wanted to go on dates or talk on the phone. He liked having a girlfriend that he would, see at school, and it was someone else in his classroom, and they went to one best buddy's prom, and then another girlfriend so the idea of romantic attachments is very real for him. And I think for many of them, for most, I would say, the desire for that. But when we talked about doing just getting together or going on dates, he really put up a big wall about that and thought it was too awkward. And he didn't want to do that. So he's not ready for that yet. But then we talked about it in other ways when it came up in movies. And then then his school did do programs on it. So hopefully he's got it. I was very surprised. This is what my op-ed in the New York Times is about. I was shocked at when I learned that in other countries, it's far more standard to start what's called relationship and sexuality education is mandated throughout the UK, starting in their equivalent of first grade. So when they're 6 years old, and then it's relationship development, a relationship education that becomes puberty and sexuality education by the time they get to middle school, their version of middle school and high school. But by starting it so young, and then it's anti-bullying and it's inclusion and a range of families, like mandated by the government, is the inclusive talk of different kinds of families and single sex parenting or gay parenting. It's just surprised me that in the UK, they might be this far ahead of. They've laid all the groundwork later on for the really important conversation that everybody needs, but like online safety, what consent means, LGBTQ identity, all of that stuff. We're way, way behind other countries because it is such a thorny issue for us. Because we're still teaching abstinence in 30, abstinence only in 30 states or something. I was just shocked that we were not farther along.
Well, I think religion plays a big role in that.
Yeah, no doubt. And it directly correlates that teen pregnancy seems to go down and that would be one measure of the success of sex education, goes down when the education isn't abstinence only and is wider and is more empowering, so that if you include education anyway, so and relationships seem to be there. I think the two measures would be, and this is too far off the topic, but the two measures of success would be suicide and teen pregnancy, because the kids who are in minority groups still have such a high rate of suicide or attempted suicide. And so the more that you just understand this is possible, this is okay. But in our group, I think in the autism community is understanding self-protection. That should be the minimum that's mandated, is understanding good touch, bad touch, which is already sort of a dated notion, because there's a confusing aspect to it, because you're saying that it should be much more focused on healthy relationships, not good touch, bad touch, because then it teaches too many kids you can never touch anywhere under my bathing suit, and it removes the possibility that, yes, you can say, yes, you can want that if you, which is a complicated concept.
Mm-hmm. All right, Cammie, I'd like to close with one last question. What advice would you give to parents who are at the beginning of their journey?
I would say take heart, parents. It is a very exciting time with a lot changing very quickly, I think. I believe that the more parents can connect with other parents, the stronger they'll be, the more of a force that they'll be, and the better their child will be in the long run, because you will have a community based, even if it's monthly get-togethers in the park, or continuing those seems to be where the creation of solutions has happened. And it will seem like there are so many roadblocks in the way when especially as you're trying to get funding and you're trying to get access to the good places that you're seeing around you that all have really long wait lists, if parents are frustrated with that. If you keep at it and you keep with it, and you push, you will not only get your child access to those places, but you will see that your voice can be heard. I've been surprised and pleased by how much states have responded to parents and what they have been asking for and fighting for, and how quickly they've adapted. Like, you will be heard. It won't be easy at first, but I believe you will be heard. If you stay with it and connect with other parents, you will get a successful situation for your child where there is both community and a sense of productivity and a sense of purpose. And it's happening more and more. I saw more and more examples of it around the country that looked a wide variety of different ways. So keep your mind open for what that might look like. And also be ready for your child to surprise you in what they can do.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, Cammie, how can people learn more about you and pick up your book?
It is available now at my website, CammieMcGovern.com. And I would love to hear from people if they want to write me there. My email is there.
Okay, perfect.
And the book is available from all resources, independent bookstores.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your ideas with us. This has really been very eye-opening, and I think useful for parents to hear as they approach that stage in their child's life.
Yeah, I hope so. I was not well prepared on many fronts or in many ways, and I hope this helps some parents out there.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to hear more from autistic self-advocates, family members, and professionals in the field of autism services. By supporting our podcast, you'll be helping our mission to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.